Trackers. Part 18. They were taken to the gardening department. It was a strange place, Masculine thought. It was like the world outside, but with all the difficult bits taken away. The only light was the faint glow of indoor suns, which stayed on all night. There was no wind, no rain, and there never would be. There was grass, but it was just painted green sacking with bits sticking out of it. There were mountainous cliffs of nothing but seeds in packets, each one with a picture that Masculine suspected was quite unreal. They showed flowers, but flowers unlike any he'd ever seen before. "Is the outside like this?" said the young priest who was guiding them. They say you've been there. They say you've seen it." He sounded hopeful. "There was more green and brown," said Masculine flatly. "And flowers?" said the priest. "Some flowers," Masculine agreed, "but not like these." "I seed flowers like these once," said Torret, and then, unusually for him, fell silent. They were led around the bulk of a giant lawnmower, and there were gnomes. Tall, chubby-faced gnomes. Pink-cheeked painted gnomes. Some of them held fishing rods or spades. Some of them were pushing painted wheelbarrows. And every single one of them was grinning. The tribe stood in silence for some time. Then Grimmer said, very softly, "How horrible." "Oh no," said the priest, horrified. "It's marvellous. Arnold Brothers, established 1905, sends you back smart and new, and then you leave the store and go to a wonderful place." "There's no women," said Granny. "That's a mercy anyway." "Oh, well," said the priest, looking a bit embarrassed. "That's always been a bit of a debatable question, but we're not sure why, but we think, and they don't look like anyone," said Granny. "They all look the same." "Well, you see, catch me coming back like that," said Granny. "If you come back like that, I don't want to go." The priest was almost in tears. "No, but I saw one like these once." It was old Torret again. He looked very grey in the face and was trembling. "You shut up, you," said Granny. "You never saw nothing." "I did too," said Torret. "When I was a little lad, Grandpa Dimpo took some of us right across the fields, right through the wood, and there was all these big stone houses where humans lived, and they had little fields in front full of flowers like what they got here, and the grass all short, and ponds with orange fish, and we saw one of these. It was sitting on a stone toadstool by one of these ponds." "It never was," said Granny automatically. "It was and all," said Torret levelly. "And I mind Grandpa saying, 'That ain't no life out there in all weathers, birds doing their was name on your hat and dogs whittling all over you.' He told us it was a giant gnome who got turned to stone on account of sitting there for so long and never catching no fish. And he said, 'What a way to go, that ain't for me, lads. I want to go sudden like.' And then a cat jumped out on him. Talk about laugh." "What happened?" said Masculine. "Oh, we gave it a good scene too with our spears and picked him up, and we all run very fast," said Torret, watching Granny's stern impression. "No, no," wailed the priest. "It's not like that at all." And then he started to sob. Granny hesitated for a moment and then patted him gently on the back. "There, there," she said. "Don't you worry about it. Daft old fool says any old thing that comes into his head." "I don't," Torret began, but Granny's warning look stopped him. They went back slowly, trying to put the terrible stone images out of their minds. Torret trailed along behind, grumbling like a worn-out thunderstorm. "Oh, I did see it, I'm telling you," he whispered. "Great grinning thing it was, sitting there on a spotty stone mushroom. Oh, I did see it. Never went back there, though. Better safe than sorry, I always said. But I did see it." It seemed taken for granted by everyone that Gerda was going to be the new abbot. The old abbot had left strict instructions. There didn't seem to be any argument. The only one against the idea, in fact, was Gerda. "Why me?" he said. "I never wanted to lead anyone. Anyway, you know," he lowered his voice, "I have doubts sometimes. The old abbot knew it, I'm sure. I can't imagine why he'd think I'd be any good." Masklin said nothing. It occurred to him that the abbot might have had a very definite aim in mind. Perhaps it was time for a little doubt. Perhaps it was time to look at Arnold Brothers, established 1905, in a different way. They were off to one side in the big underfloor area the stationery used for important meetings. It was the one place in the store, apart from the food hall, where fighting was strictly forbidden. The heads of the families, rulers' departments and sub-departments were milling around out there. They might not be allowed to bear weapons, but they were cutting one another dead at every opportunity with their words. Getting them to even think of working together would be impossible without the stationery. It was odd, really. The stationery had no real power at all. But all the families needed them, and none of them feared them, and so they survived and, in a strange sort of way, led. A haberdashery wouldn't listen even to common sense from an ironmongery on general principles, but they would if the speaker was a stationery, because everyone knew the stationery didn't take sides. He turned to Gerda. "We need to talk to someone in the ironmongery. They control the electric, don't they? And the lorry nest." "That's the Count de Ironmongery over there," said Gerda, pointing. "Thin fellow with the thin moustache. Not very religious. Doesn't know much about electric, though." "I thought you told me—" "Oh, the ironmongery do. The underlings and servants and whatnot. But not people like the Count. Good heavens!" Gerda smiled. "You don't think the Duke de Haberdashery even touches a pair of scissors, do you? Or the Baroness Delicatessen goes and cuts up food her actual self?" He looked sideways at Masklin. "You've got a plan, haven't you?" he said. "Yes, sort of." "What are you going to tell them then?" Masklin picked absently at the tip of his spear. "The truth. I'm going to tell them that they can leave the store and take it all with them. I think it should be possible." Gerda rubbed his chin. He said. "I suppose it's possible, if everyone carries as much food and stuff as they can. But it will soon run out, and anyway, you can't carry electric. It lives in wires, you know." "How many stationery can read human?" said Masklin, ignoring him. "All of us can read a bit, of course," said Gerda. "But only 4 of us are any real good at it, if you must know." "I don't think that's going to be enough," said Masklin. "Well, there's a trick to it, and not everyone can get the hang of it. What are you planning?" "A way to get everyone out, carrying everything we'll ever need, ever," said Masklin. "They'll be squashed under the weight." "Not really. Most of what they'll be carrying doesn't weigh anything at all." Gerda looked worried. "This isn't some mad scheme of Dorcas's, is it?" he said. "No." Masklin felt like he might explode. His head wasn't big enough to hold all the things the thing had told him. He was the only one. Oh, the abbot had known and died with his eyes full of stars, but even he didn't understand. The galaxy. The old man thought it was just a great big room outside the store, just the biggest apartment ever. Perhaps Gerda wouldn't comprehend either. He'd lived all his life under a roof. He had no idea of the sort of distances involved. Masklin felt a slight surge of pride at this. The store gnomes couldn't understand what the thing was saying, because they had no experiences to draw on. To them, from one end of the store to the other was the biggest possible distance in the world. They wouldn't be able to get to grips with the fact that the stars, for instance, were much further away. Even if you ran all the way, it'd probably take weeks to reach them. He'd have to lead up to it, very gently. The stars. A long time ago, gnomes had travelled between them on things that made lorries look tiny and had been built by gnomes. And one of the great ships, exploring around a little star on the edge of nowhere, had sent out a smaller ship to land on the world of the humans. But something had gone wrong. Masklin hadn't understood that bit, except that the thing that moved the ships was very, very powerful. Hundreds of the gnomes had survived, though. One of them, searching through the wreckage, had found the thing. It wasn't any good without electricity to eat, but the gnomes had kept it nonetheless, because it had been the machine that steered the ship. And the generations had passed by, and the gnomes forgot everything, except that the thing was very important. That was enough for one head to carry, Masklin thought, but it wasn't the most important bit. It wasn't the bit that made his blood fizz and his fingers tingle. This was the important bit. The big ship, the one that could fly between the stars, was still up there, somewhere. It was tended by machines like the thing, patiently waiting for the gnomes to come back. Time meant nothing to them. There were machines to sweep the long corridors, and machines that made food and watched the stars and patiently counted the hours and minutes in the long, dark emptiness of the ship. And they'd wait forever. They didn't know what time was, except something to be counted and filed away. They'd wait until the sun went cold and the moon died, carefully repairing the ship and keeping it ready for the gnomes to come back. To take them home. And while they waited, Masklin thought, we forgot all about them. We forgot everything about ourselves and lived in holes in the ground. He knew what he had to do. It was, of course, an impossible task, but he was used to them. Dragging a rat all the way from the woods to the hole had been an impossible task, but it wasn't impossible to drag it a little way. So you did that, and then you had a rest, and then you dragged it a little way again. The way to deal with an impossible task was to chop it down into a number of merely very difficult tasks and break each one of them into a group of horribly hard tasks and each one of them into tricky jobs and each one of them... Probably the hardest job of all was to make the gnomes understand what they once were and could be again. He did have a plan. Well, it had started off as the thing's plan, but he'd turned it over and over in his mind so much he felt it belonged to him. It was probably an impossible plan, but he'd never know unless he tried it. Gerda was still watching him cautiously. Said Masklin. This plan? Yes, said Gerda. The abbot told me that the Stationery have always tried to make gnomes work together and stop squabbling, said Masklin. That has always been our desire, yes. This plan will mean they will have to work together. Good. Only, I don't think you're going to like it much, said Masklin. That's unfair. How can you make assumptions like that? Said Gerda. I think you'll laugh at it, said Masklin. The only way to find out is to tell me, said Gerda. Masklin told him. When Gerda was over the shock, he laughed and laughed. And then he looked at Masklin's face and stopped. You're not serious, he said. Let me put it like this, said Masklin. Have we got a better plan? Will you support me? But how can gnomes... Is it even possible that we... Gerda began. We'll find a way, said Masklin. With Arnold Brothers' established 1905's help, of course, he added diplomatically. Oh, of course, said Gerda weakly. He pulled himself together. Anyway, if I'm to be the new abbot, I have to make a speech, he said. It's expected. General messages of goodwill and so on. We can talk about this later, reflect upon it in leisure in the sober surroundings of... Masklin shook his head. Gerda swallowed. You mean now, he said. Yes, said Masklin. Now. We tell them now.